Welcome to Fireside Chats with Erin. I'm Erin Gowriluk, the president of the Canada Grains Council and your host. This podcast serves as a platform to explore grain sector priorities that reflect the Council's work here at home and around the world. Together, we will discuss issues and ideas with policymakers and industry influencers. And today, we're recording a special episode in celebration of International Women's Day, a global day that celebrates the social, economic, cultural, and political achievements of women. But it's also a call to action for accelerating women's equality. And this year's theme for International Women's Day is Accelerate Action, a call for increased efforts to achieve gender equality and eliminate barriers that prevent women from reaching their full potential. And today, we're going to explore how to accelerate action in the context of Canada's agriculture sector. And joining me for this important conversation are two incredible ag leaders I expect will be relatively familiar faces, certainly for our Canadian listeners. Tessa Ritter joined Viterra in 2021 as the Manager of Stakeholder Relations. Through this role, she represented exporters on the Canola Council of Canada, Cereals Canada, and the Western Grain Elevator Association. And she became the chair of the Canola Council in March of 2024. And before joining Viterra, Tessa was a senior leader with the Saskatchewan government, serving in multiple chiefs of staff roles in numerous portfolios, including innovation, status of women, and advanced education. Tessa has held public affairs roles in Saskatchewan and internationally for over 15 years, with experience at H&K Strategies, Farm Credit Canada, and the United Nations. Tessa is passionate about women in leadership. She has volunteered as a board member of Equal Voice since 2019. And more importantly, Tessa entered into parenthood in November and is currently on leave from her role at Viterra until late 2025. But we are so grateful that she has found the time to join us here, given the breadth of her experience on this topic specifically. Leta LaRush is our second guest, and she is the Vice President for Business Management at BASF Canada Agricultural Solutions, based out of the Calgary head office and my previous hometown. In this role, Leta leads Agricultural Solutions, the Canadian leadership team, and is responsible for the division's business activities. She also serves on the Agricultural Solutions North American Leadership Team, the BASF Canada Leadership Team, and the Crop Life Canada Board. Leta is a forward-thinking, creative, and passionate leader, as well as an influential speaker and an advocate for sustainability and supporting women in the agriculture industry. In addition to her role, Leta is a member of BASF Canada's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council, and is a strong advocate of the employee resource groups in Canada. That's why she's here today. Prior to this role, and since joining BASF in 2011, Leta has served the company in various roles, including corporate affairs, customer strategy, innovation, and marketing. Leta currently lives in Calgary with her husband, Eric, and two busy boys. I can imagine, because Blake is 6 and Miles is 3. Tessa, this is what you have to look forward to. Ladies, thank you for stopping by for a fireside chat.
Thanks for having us, Erin.
My pleasure. I want to start with you, Leta. I want to start by asking you about your journey in agriculture and what inspired you in particular to pursue a career in this sector.
Well, thanks again for having me, Erin. It's really great to be here today. I love working in our industry. I grew up in what I would describe as an adjacent industry. So my parents managed a standardbred racehorse operation in southern Ontario. And while I loved our home and I had so much respect for my parents' work ethic, my initial ambition was to get off the farm. So I studied business and speech communication. I actually started my career out in Ottawa. And as part of my responsibilities, I wrote speeches for federal ministers, including the Minister of Agriculture. But shortly after my time in Ottawa, I joined BASF, and I've spent most of my career here at BASF, but I haven't spent my whole career in the agriculture business. And that's been really beneficial from a developmental perspective. I've been able to learn from other industries, and different experiences. But I think what's always brought me back to agriculture is the people, the passion, the work ethic, the purpose, and really the openness that I've found working in agriculture. So the people are what has inspired me to pursue a career in this sector.
I don't disagree. Tessa, reading your bio, I learned a few things about you, but you seem like a relative newcomer to the ag industry. Is that true? And if so, what brought you here?
It's true. And often, so when I initially started in the industry, I really struggled answering this question because, I had a bit of imposter syndrome, not coming from a farm, thinking most people from agriculture. And it is true, like at the tables that I'm sitting at, a lot of the people have, 25 years experience is the norm. Some people have 30 and 40 and upwards. And so, me only being at Viterra for 4 years, that's like 5 minutes of real in the ag industry. So I'm happy to hear even from Leta, she didn't start here either. And I think that that actually has been a great asset to me. So the longer I spend in ag, I am really proud to say, you know what, I didn't start here. I studied international development. I had, I've sort of had that humanitarian fire inside of me. I wanted to save the world growing up and did some international work, came home, kind of stumbled into politics a little bit. And I think it was really within that job, within the Saskatchewan government, seeing, agriculture being that economic driver, the growth plan goal targets. A lot of the stakeholders are from, at the time, were from rural Saskatchewan, are, working on the post-secondary education pieces and regional colleges in rural areas. That kind of opened my eyes to truly how important the industry is, but also the people. I was going to say the exact same thing. There's this pride in the ag industry. Like everyone is so proud to be from agriculture. And I think, especially when I worked at FCC, we are feeding the world. And, at Viterra, I think there's something so great about, you're taking product from farmers and sending that, you're moving that all across the world. And I think there's a lot of pride that comes with that. And that's what keeps me in this industry, really is the people for sure.
Excellent. Thank you both for that perspective. Let's get into it, ladies. It's International Women's Day. So I want to talk about what it is to be a woman working in this industry. And I appreciate that you have some perspectives beyond the agriculture industry as well that will inform that. So Tessa, I'm going to start with you and ask if you have specifically faced any challenges working as a woman in, look, we love the industry, we love the people, but this has historically been a male-dominated industry. So have you faced any challenges in your experience? And if so, how have you overcome them?
For sure. So I had left politics, which want to talk about male dominated industries. I was a staffer, but a lot of the staffers were men. Many of the MLAs and cabinet ministers were men. A lot of the stakeholders that you deal with are men. And when I was leaving that role to go to Viterra, a couple of people, and not within government, but just stakeholders that I had met, had said to me, "Oh, wow, the grain industry is just the oldest boys club that exists." And I remember thinking, why would anyone say that? Okay, sure. Excited to take on this role. But at the back of my head, I thought, okay, I'm leaving politics to go into this. Am I crazy? And sure, there are a lot of men that work in our industry. I think that change is slowly starting to happen here. There's lots of um especially once you get up a certain level, the tables that I'm sitting at, it is all men, but feel like I have felt nothing but welcomed in the industry. And there are a lot of talented, courageous women that I am surrounded by as well. I think regardless of where you work, we're always facing challenges as people, not just women, as humans, we're facing challenges in the workplace. So I wouldn't say, I faced more in the agriculture industry than I have in any other industry that I worked in. The fact of the matter is there are a lot of men around the table, but there's also a lot of really great women that I've been able to work with and build my networks around. And so, I love it. I don't see it as a negative thing to work in what is historically a male dominated industry. It's a challenge, but it is a lot of fun also at the same time.
Thanks. Leta, what has your experience been?
I mean, honestly, Erin, for me, this one's a bit of a tricky question to answer because I was thinking about this, and despite growing up in a historically male-dominated industry, my parents had two girls. They always told us we could do anything, and we believed them. And then I've spent most of my career at BASF, and it's a company that has been committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion for a long time. And I think I've really been a beneficiary of that. I mean, as an example, Women in BASF is one of the many employee resource groups that we have at BASF. You mentioned that in the bio, and it's more than 20 years old. So we've had an employee resource group for women at BASF for a really long time. And this group aims to support the development of women, and I think it's created a lasting impact on our culture internally, really paving the way for many women like myself to not have to face as much gender bias in the workplace. That said, like Tessa, I find myself in, meetings rooms outside of BASF and in other situations in the industry where I do think I've faced unconscious bias from my peers at times. And, in all honesty, it's hard to say if that's related to my gender or my age, but I've found myself in situations where I think that I may have people underestimating my capabilities or questioning my intent. And I've personally always felt that being really open and at times maybe even a bit vulnerable, asking really thoughtful questions, and also just reminding myself that I should be there and I need to be there, and not letting, I think Tessa described it as imposter syndrome, kind of impact my confidence in that moment, has been really important success factors to overcome any of that unconscious bias. And when I've done those things, I've found that the barriers do come down quite quickly, and that these colleagues and I are able to really establish mutual respect and some really great working relationships.
So now that we've set the table with your personal experiences, and I appreciate that, let's talk a bit about what we can do, how we can create more success stories like the ones that you've pointed to, Leta, in particular, with what BASF has been involved in doing now for 20 plus years. That's commendable. My colleague, Sandra Filion, on our team, published an op-ed in the Western Producer this week where she called on sector colleagues, male and female alike, to, and I quote, pull up a chair for women entering the grain sector, ensuring they have the support and mentorship needed to thrive. Organizations, industry leaders, and policymakers all have a role to play in fostering environments where women are not just welcomed, but are encouraged and empowered. So, Leta, I'll start with you. Can you tell me about a time when someone invited you to take a seat at the table and what that meant for you?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to, Erin. And, kind of going back to how Tessa and I responded to your first question, I think something that makes the ag sector unique is that is inherently welcoming, especially if you show genuine care and a strong work ethic. I mean, I've never been denied a visit to a farmer's field or excluded from coffee at the kitchen table. And I've found that if you show up with curiosity and a willingness to contribute, people not only make space for you, but they're really generous with their time and willing to help you grow and learn. And I read Sandra's article that you sent through, and for me, it really speaks to the importance of allyship and sponsorship. And throughout my career, I've cultivated relationships with allies from diverse background. Many of the people I think of as sponsors and mentors have been men. And I think these relationships have been mutually beneficial because we both appreciate the different perspectives that we're bringing to the table. And early in my career, I was introduced to a book by Sylvia Ann Hewlett. You may be familiar with it. It's called Forget a Mentor, Find a Sponsor. And she speaks to the difference of mentoring or a mentoring relationship and a sponsor relationship, essentially saying, look, they're both important, but the benefit of a sponsor is that they have some skin in the game in their career, because that relationship is mutually beneficial. And that concept's been really powerful for me. And, I can think of a leader early in my career that I would describe really more than a sponsor than a mentor, because he really created space for me to take some risks, to try new things. But, not so much space that if I fell, there was no one there to catch me. And I think that just, finding someone that's a sponsor for you, creating connections that enhance kind of collective understanding and decision making really make the whole organization better. It's not just about our personal development as women. And now that I find myself in a leadership role, I often find myself cognizant of who's at the table and really looking around to see, hey, are we missing a perspective to help make a robust decision here? And, that could be related to gender. It could be related to diversity of work experience or ethnic background. But I think that just having, a diverse table is going to lead to better decision making. And that's why we make such a point of doing it at BASF.
I don't disagree with anything you've said, especially as it relates to the mentorship piece, because most of mine, if not all, exclusively when I first entered into this industry were men, because I joined the commissions in Alberta and the entire board was men. They were all male and all mentors without exception. And I agree, if you show up with a level of curiosity, a willingness to learn, they will teach you. And that was my experience, certainly. I'd like to know, Tessa, what your experience was when you entered the industry.
Yeah, so I think the most recent example of this, I have more to say about that mentorship and sponsorship role later on, but just, being asked, given a seat at the table. And so I think of, last year, a prominent leader in ag had said to me, why don't you put your name in the hat for Canola Council chair? And it was very interesting because I had thought, yeah, have I been here long enough? Have I been around this table long enough? Do I have my colleagues' respect? Do I have the skills and abilities? Do I know enough about the canola? Like I went on and on and on and thought, do I have can I do this? But, there's one person that had said to me, you should really do this. And I thought, I don't know if the timing's right. Another person came up to me and said, you should put your name in the hat to be chair. And I thought, okay, this is very interesting. I remember really like agonizing over it and thinking, okay, I need to talk to the leadership at Viterra about it. And I happened to have a meeting with the CEO and two of our senior leaders on a different topic. And I went into that meeting prepared to say, look, it has been suggested to me that I've raised my hand and do this role. These are all the reasons why I do want to do it and have a discussion about it. And it was so interesting bringing that discussion up because, they sort of looked at me and when I said, what do you think about me putting my hand up to put my name in the hat to be chair? And they were like, do you want to do it? Do you genuinely want to do it? Yeah. Well, yeah, I think you should do it. And that was it. That was the end of the discussion. And I thought, I have been agonizing about this for 3 days. I had a bunch of informal consultations with people that I know and trust. I've talked to other senior leaders at other companies. And here my leaders at Viterra saying, yeah, you want to do it, go for it. And I thought, that's very interesting. Like I was prepared to sell them on it. And after that meeting, one of them had come up to me and said, Tessa, you know what? Men don't ask for permission to do things. Like just as in passing had said that to me. And I reflect on that often because I think he's absolutely correct. It's same as we often hear, a woman will look at a job description and think, do I have all the skills and abilities in order to apply for this job as president or CEO or whatever role you're doing? And they may not apply because they only have 80% of what's required. A man will apply if they have 10% of what's required because the job sounds good. And so I think, that has been trying to work through my own I think women are harder on themselves actually at times. And so I think that has been something that I've had to work through. And it's just interesting sort of being surrounded at tables of men that are willing to mentor you. That was really helpful to me. Once I got a seat at that table, I felt, it was really nice to see and, it felt good that external stakeholders gave me that validation, like you deserve it, there's a space for you here. And so that was kind of my most recent experience of, we deserve you have a voice, you deserve to be here. It doesn't matter that you don't have 30 years of experience in the industry. You can lead this group, and you should be proud to do it. And so that was sort of my first foray into, put your hand up, you've been asked, and you can lead this group despite the fact that you're sort of new at the table.
It's obvious to me in many instances when I've had a woman join the board or the leadership team, just the approach that she takes because of the amount of thought that goes into her decision to take on that role. She takes it very seriously. As a result, I think of the deliberations that she does, I think both internally and with respect to the colleagues that surround her. So let's talk a bit about how, and we're so grateful that you found the confidence, both of you, to step into these leadership positions. What advice would you give to organizations, when we think about the key barriers that may be in place preventing other women who may not have the same level of confidence? What can we do? What are some of those barriers that we need to address that are preventing more women from taking on these positions? And Leta, maybe I'll start with you.
So I think first, Erin, I'll reemphasize the importance of allyship. So I think building strong relationship with a network of influence really allows people to take charge of their own career journey and establish some of those pathways to leadership opportunities. And it's really rewarding, I guess, is the word that comes to mind. But to hear about the progress we've made as an industry, when I hear Tessa's story about, being approached by so many people to join the Canola Council and finding that support. The one area that I think that there's still opportunity for us is around creating a culture that doesn't fall into gender stereotypes around things like family planning. And a topic that comes up a lot in my mentoring discussions with mentees is this topic of family versus career progression. And something that we're really striving for at BASF is to create a culture where these topics don't need to be in direct conflict with each other. So for example, we offer 5 months of parental leave top up, and that's available to both men and women. And as a result, what we're seeing is increasingly more and more males in our organization are taking advantage of parental leave. And that creates a shift in mindset around some of the gender norms or bias that may exist around parenting. Personally, I feel that the fact that my husband and I approach parenting as a 50-50 responsibility, if I throw grandma into the mix, some days it's more like 33, but we really approach it as a team. And I think that's been a huge success factor in my career. And I found that talking about that openly and normalizing that has also been really helpful in helping others see, what are some things that can lead to, a successful career and more leadership opportunities. Lastly, maybe I'll just end this topic by saying I'm really proud of our Canadian leadership team in that we have 50% women on my leadership team. And that has happened quite organically. I think some of it's happened just as we've naturally fostered a more inclusive culture. But I think it's also because we've created a culture within the organization that, normalizes things like, both parents having a role when it comes to things like family planning. So that's a big one for me. And I think that's an area that we still have more work to do as an industry at large.
I love that example. That is a very compelling example of what organizations can do to level the playing field, for lack of a better term. I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm going to ask Tessa now to weigh in on the same question before I circle back on one of the points that you flagged. You're 50-50 on the leadership team. I want to talk a bit more about how we get there, especially for organizations that may not necessarily have some of the policies and programs in place that BASF have. But Tessa, can you weigh in on this in terms of key barriers in your view?
Yeah, it's very interesting and timely, obviously, because you would have heard from my bio that I'm on maternity leave right now. And I have to say, Erin, I'm really grateful for you for asking me to do this podcast, given the fact that I'm on maternity leave. I think that is, that one of the barriers I think that women face is that work-life balance, and not in the way that we think it is. I think it's that unconscious bias of people thinking they may not want to do that while they're on maternity leave, or they may not want to take that job because they don't want to travel because they have young kids. And you know what? It happens both ways. There's a lot of men that I work with that have young families, and you could hear them saying, they might not want to travel because they have young kids, or they don't want to go to that convention because they have young kids. And so, Erin, for you to reach out knowing I was on maternity leave, but to ask me anyway, I really am grateful, because we devote so much of our time and energy to our careers. And so, suddenly you're all work all the time. And then, you bring this child into the work and world, and suddenly you're like, okay, like a little bit of an identity crisis. Like, who am I? I'm still really passionate about the industry. Yes, I'm taking 12 months off to spend with my son, but my brain doesn't stop thinking about some of the issues that we're faced in the industry right now. And so I think, to just it's good for leaders to understand, human beings are complex, and they still would like to have that exposure to do those things. And just because we don't have this person actively on payroll right now, they can still sort of participate. They could come to the networking things. We can invite them to our strategic planning session if we need, if they choose to. And again, I can't lump all women together in the same basket, because some women choose maybe to shut everything off and in the time that they're with their child, and that's not right or wrong. It's just understanding that human beings are complex and everyone wants to do something different. Just thinking about the barriers piece, so something that I've thought a lot about in this industry, and I think in previous jobs that I've had, I've always thought, as a relationship builder, like, people do business with those that they know and trust. And so you think about having to build your networks. And I think being in a male dominated industry, often, the informal networking is centered around, golfing, sporting events, those type of things that maybe not all women are necessarily a part of. And so I think about, that unconscious bias that exists too. So it's not, or it's how do women get exposure to those informal networks. And so I think that's something that it's important to find those male allies that'll kind of bring you into that circle, because I think it's really important to have not only formal opportunities for mentorship and sponsorship, but to have that informal opportunity as well too, because I think often women are excluded because they don't necessarily partake in the same activities that men would do. And so I think that has been a bit of a barrier as well. So.
Oh, this is such a good conversation. I can relate to so much of what you have both said. I love the unconscious bias piece and some of the activities that you've identified. And I'll go one step further and talk a bit about, when I first entered the industry, I was surprised at the amount of decisions that were taken and serious conversations that were had over a glass of scotch in the bar after the conference, in places where women may be less inclined to go. And so you weren't a part of those conversations. I felt very often I may have been left out from some of those conversations that took place after hours. And so addressing some of those extracurricular activities, be it around the sports or around how we convene outside of those formal meetings, I think is important too.
And I just want to add to something, because I just thought that isn't, it isn't just an ag issue as well. Like, I can think about when I was a political staffer in government. So I was a chief of staff to both male and female cabinet ministers. And I could see the difference, speaking to Leta's comments about, the household responsibilities and, having a partner that is doing 50% of those things. Because often, when you're in an MLA, there's networking receptions in the evening. So if you're a female minister, if in your household it might be more traditional, like, you have to get your kids to sporting events, you're getting food on the table. It really does take, you are at an advantage also if you have a partner that's doing 50%, or a grandma that's doing those things. And I think that often in more traditional households, it's tough for women to kind of get out and do those things. And so I just want to make sure that, it's not just an agriculture only industry thing. It's, I think, often with, a lot of those duties still falling to women, although we've seen progress. Those are the types of things that can impact us when we're trying to build those formal and informal networks as well too. So.
Agreed. I feel it. Hey, as a single mom, I have one in university, But a 9-year-old getting out to those evening receptions is a key part and one of the things I most enjoy about the work that I do, but it doesn't mean it's easy. It's especially
Absolutely.
challenging. So I think we have to think too a bit about that. And I can appreciate the decision that you take around leave. I remember when I reflect 9 years ago after I had my daughter, I came back to work after only 3 months. Now, I may have done things a little differently if I wasn't experiencing a very high level of FOMO at the time. I remember being at a conference, and it was actually the Crops Convention. My mother traveled with me from Calgary so I could nurse my daughter between sessions because I felt compelled to get back and demonstrate that I was still very much a part of the industry. I hadn't gone anywhere. May have done things a little differently in retrospect, but there you go. We all make those choices, and they're not easy decisions to make. But I want to talk to you, Tessa, about a point that Leta raised, and I want to ask you specifically, just given some of the work that you've done prior to joining the ag industry and the work that you continue to do now through Equal Voice. And this is a controversial subject, and maybe I'll go first. It's around the idea of targets or objectives. If you are not an organization that may have the policies and programs in place that BASF has done, and you're looking to achieve whatever your ratio might be, 50-50 on the leadership team, 50-50 on the board of directors, how do we feel about setting targets? That is a controversial topic. I'll go first and say I'm all for it because I believe if we're going to talk about accelerating action, accountability is one of the key ingredients. And it's pretty tough to deny a number if you can't meet it, if you haven't reached that target. The question is around why haven't you? And that creates a level of accountability. But it's a nuanced debate, I understand, and I'd love to get your perspective on this, Tessa.
Thank you for the question, Erin. This one is as a woman, I would say a little bit conflicted with the targets, to be really honest. I think from a company perspective, we're setting targets all the time for a business and our growth strategy. Companies want to grow, we want to achieve specific things. Many companies now have those aspirational targets. We want 30% of our leadership team to be women by 2028. I'm just throwing a random target out there. There have been times in my career when I have thought, I don't want to be a quota. Like that is something that I think I struggle with. But seeing how slow change is at times, I think that the targets are definitely helpful. If a company doesn't have targets, so that isn't the only way to achieve things. And I know that, HR teams are undergoing a lot of that unconscious bias training now. Many companies are now, they want their teams to be reflective of the communities that they serve. And so I know that work is being done. If those targets might not be the only way for true growth to happen. But I will say, where I am conflicted by it because there has been an instance when I've been in the ag industry that I put my name forward for something and a male colleague at the table had said, I was interested in that too, Tessa, but I thought we were looking for someone that was more diverse. And I think about that often. It was like about the first 6 months into my role. It wasn't someone within my company, by the way. It was with someone in the greater industry. And it really made me feel awful, frankly, because I thought I had built the respect of my peers around the table. And this person kind of said to me, I thought we were looking for someone that was diverse. And so I have always kind of struggled with that piece. I want to become a leader. I want to be promoted because I've earned that role. But on the flip side, we know that unconscious bias exists and it's harder for women to, break that glass ceiling. And so I really am conflicted about it, Erin. I don't mean to give you such a wishy-washy answer. I think good work is being done. I think for women that work at companies that might not necessarily have those targets, I think, don't feel bad about that. There are other ways, I think you can build those informal networks, find that sponsor, find that mentor. It isn't the only way to see progress in this area. So I think that they're fundamentally, I think the targets are good. Do they need to be as specific as 50-50? I don't know. I'm not an expert in that. Progress is progress. But I do think, we're setting targets all the time. So why don't we set it for some, to make sure that our teams are reflective of the communities that we serve.
I appreciate that your answer has given us something to think about. So why does
And Erin, if I could, I just wanted to add one thing. I think if a company or an organization is going to have targets, it's also really important that they take the time to explain why they're having those targets and what they mean and don't mean. Because I think a lot of women, myself included, can relate to, and I really appreciate Tessa's openness, this fear that someone is only getting an opportunity because they fall into, a category of diversity such as gender. And I think that's really unfair for people that, have worked really hard, are extremely talented, and have earned that opportunity. And I also think that's why there is so much hesitation from women about whether we should or should not have those targets. So I think something that companies and leaders can do, if we're going to set targets, then let's talk about why we have them, and also be really open about the way we're approaching our hiring processes, so that it doesn't just feel like, well, I'm not even going to apply for the job because I heard Tessa applied for it, and obviously they're looking for a diverse candidate, so I'm out, right? That's that's not fair for the colleague, male or women, who ends up getting male or man or woman who ends up getting that opportunity.
Excellent. I feel like we could dedicate an entire episode to this particular topic, but it's a good conversation. I appreciate that you've started that conversation, left us with something to think a bit more about. But Lena, I want to ask you why all of this matters. I mean, why does it matter that 50% of BASF's leadership team is women? What will we experience, in your view, if we have more women in leadership roles? How does that benefit the sector?
Yeah, well, and first I want to clarify, 50% is the number we have. It's not the number we got to with the target. So, but I think that, for any organization, diversity of thought is critical for innovation and problem solving. It is been widely studied that people with diverse backgrounds, including gender, bring unique perspectives and experiences, and that leads to more creative solutions and approaches to industry challenges. And, the pace of change and the number of challenges our industry is being confronted with, we need all of the innovative, creative minds around the table that we can possibly get. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. The second for me is, as our customer base evolves, I think that it's essential that our leadership reflects the diversity of growers and consumers. Women in leadership can help ensure that we understand and address the needs of all segments of our market. And I think that variety also leads to more comprehensive discussions, better informed strategies. So going back to, do you have all the right people around the table to make a really robust decision around things impacting our industry? And even more as an industry, that we connect further and further down the value chain. I think that as we incorporate more women into leadership positions, we also can better engage with and understand the perspectives of all stakeholders, again, whether that be producers or consumers. So I think it's extremely important for our industry that we're having more and more women in leadership roles. That's going to be really important to ensuring, a good future for agriculture.
Tessa, I was going to ask you about what advice you would give to young women to encourage them to step into leadership roles, but what advice would you give to any woman, a woman at any age, who has an interest in stepping into a leadership role?
Absolutely. I would say you get out there and build your network of sponsors and mentors. Even if you don't have, I think, some companies have formalized mentorship and sponsorship programs and some don't. And I think even if you don't have a formalized program, that sponsor is going to help you throughout your career. So find those people. This might be controversial, so I want to be very careful when I say it. But, be selective of the events that you go to, the conferences, and and I say that as in there's a lot of women in agriculture events out there. And I sort of wonder, when we know that the majority of our leadership positions are occupied by men, why we often segregate women into women in leadership of, women in ag events. And a great example, one of my colleagues, so a few years ago at agriculture show, they had, you know, rather than having the women on the main stage, like to talk about your experience being a woman in ag, they kind of had it sloughed off in the corner somewhere, like, you know, 3 blocks away upstairs, and had this event for women. And she had said to me, you know, it's 20, it was either 2022 or 2023, but it's 2023. Why do we have this women's event off in the corner? It should be on the main stage, because surely the people, you know, the producers that are here, 50% of them are female. Like, we don't need to be no longer in a corner. And I say that because, again, those informal opportunities to network with senior leaders that are often men, we're not doing that when we're sort of off on the side talking about how we achieve work-life balance as women. Because let's face it, it's very difficult to achieve work-life balance. There's always going to be something, you know, if I go to this networking event, I'm not going to be able to put my child to sleep, grandma's going to be able to do it. It's kind of, things are going to ebb and flow through your life. And I just think, you know, be selective of these events. They have their purpose, absolutely. But I think, you know, the more we can access those informal networks with leaders to, you know, build, you know, those influential advisors that Leta suggested at the very beginning of this podcast, I think that that's crucial. And I think that that's something that women should really think about when they attend. I also think say yes, because as someone who, you know, should I do this? Should I do the podcast? Should I join this group? I think say yes when you're asked. Just, you know, don't ask for permission. And you know what, there's a space for you here. There's a space for you here. So don't second guess yourself. Say yes when you're asked. You have just as much, you know, right to be here than anyone else. And you know, only go to a couple women in events if you can. Try and get out there and build your networks, because I think it's really, really important. I don't mean to be controversial when I say that, because they do have their place, but I often think the irony when the majority of our boardrooms and executive offices are filled with men, that we spend a lot of time doing that. And I think just the, you know, women often feel like they need to sign up and do more education when they have those skills. They have the leadership skills. We know this, you know, girls from a young age are showing leadership skills. Like, we don't need specific, you know, leadership programming for women. It's great to do that coaching, but you know what? We have the skills and abilities to be here. So I just think it's really, really important to be selective on where you're sort of spending your time, especially as a woman as well.
Great, tangible, practical advice, Tessa. Thank you. Leta.
I love Tessa's answer. I don't want to add too much to it. I just think, kind of building on the last thing you said, confidence is crucial. Trust in your abilities, recognize the value you bring to the table. And I would say don't hesitate to take on new challenges and roles, even if they push, especially if they push you outside of your comfort zone. And that's advice I would give to anyone in their career, men or women. But I think as women, it's also important that we speak up about accomplishments and also aspirations. So don't be shy to advocate for the roles and opportunities that you desire in your organization or your network. But I love Tessa's answer. So I'll leave it there, and I don't want to steal that thunder.
It was a good answer. And buy the book, Forget a Mentor, Find a Sponsor, because the concept of a sponsor wasn't something that I'd heard of previously. So I'm going to read the book now too, out of curiosity. I'm interested in the concept. I want to shift gears for a moment and get back to a place where we typically spend a lot of time on this podcast, and that is talking about policy and political matters. And look, I don't want to get too political today, but I really appreciate the frankness and the candor that you've both brought to today's conversation. I want to invite your reaction to something that's happening outside of the agriculture industry. Let's pan out for a moment and talk a bit about some of the societal shifts that we're seeing. And I bring this up because I've been involved in these conversations for a number of years. And sometimes the feedback that I get is that gender discrimination doesn't exist in Canada. Not a conversation worth having. Okay. And how much of what we're seeing, for example, in the United States, both with respect to government and corporate shifts away from diversity, equity, and inclusion policies and programs, is something in your view that Canadians ought to be thinking and talking more about?
This is a very tricky question to answer, Erin. So I know you don't want to get political, but the first thing that comes to my mind with how you phrase that question is Canadians right now are very much concerned about the cost of living and how they're going to put gas in their car. Are they going to have a job? Can they, can they buy a house? Um, those things are very much top of mind for Canadians. I think, based on what's going on in the economy, the 25% tariffs that, are keeping a lot of us up at night, how that's going to impact us, I think we will see corporations kind of get back to core business. How do we get back to core business? Our world is increasingly polarized right now, and I feel like it's almost hard to have this discussion because you're going to piss someone off depending on what you say on either end of the spectrum. And I think that, the pendulum, when it swings too far in one direction, it has to go all the way back before we could find that balance in the middle here. And so I think, we have the economic situation, we have, you know, a new government with new policies. What's going to happen? I don't know what's going to happen. Is that a discussion that Canadians need to be thinking about? There's a lot of things that Canadians need to be thinking about right now. I think if companies start dropping some of those programs, we talked about it earlier. Do you necessarily, what happens if you don't have the targets? Leta has said BASF didn't have that 50% target, and there they are with 50% of their leadership team being, filled with women in executive seats. And so it's concerning. I'm trying not to panic about it because, if that's starting to happen in the US, you may start to see it in Canada. But because those programs are ending, it does not take away all of the work that's been done, for example, with human resource teams at companies that did the unconscious bias training. I think that we will still see progress, but it's a different time that we're entering into right now. And I think there's no right way to answer that question. I hope that we can find that balance, and the pendulum's it's swinging right now, and I hope that women still have opportunities. And it's not that I hope they still have opportunities to get into leadership roles without some of that programming in place. We have to, it's a wait and see approach. And I do think it's likely top of mind for a lot of women, right? Because we see what's going on in the US and we think about how that's going to impact us here. And I hope that we can get to a place as a society that we can get back to debating these things without me just completely disagreeing with you, not listening to your point of view, and just living in this hyper polarized world that we are, where it's, we're doing all of the EDI or we're doing none of it. Like, why does it have to be 100%, all or nothing? I really, really want to get back to, that gray area in life where it's not all or nothing. I think it benefits all of us when we can do that. So, I am hopeful that a lot of the work that's been done in Canada specifically and in our industry specifically won't be too impacted by some of those things. But I guess you never know. I'm just speaking from my own personal experience.
And thanks for taking that question. And I expect that your work on this topic specifically is going to continue through organizations like Equal Voice, for example. Those organizations exist, I think, to continue to advance that conversation. And to Leta's point, I go back to the need for more innovative, creative solutions. We are facing a myriad of challenges in Canada and around the world. And if we want to have innovative, creative solutions to address those challenges, we need to have everybody at the table to do it. So I hope there's recognition that those programs are really important so that we can bring the very best leaders to the table to bring the best, most innovative, creative solutions to address some of these very difficult challenges. Let's end on a high note. Leta, my last question is for you, and that is around if you could implement one major change today to create more opportunities for women in agriculture, what would it be?
I'm never good at just picking one, Erin, and we've talked about so many opportunities. I think something we haven't talked about too much yet, though, is just changing how and where we traditionally recruit as an industry. I think that would make a really big difference. You just made the comment, and we've talked about this need for diverse perspectives to drive innovation, whether that involves, reaching out to people with a traditional data science or technical background, insights from other industries industries. And I think in order to really achieve that, we need to encourage and support women's participation in all aspects of agriculture and agricultural innovation. And I think to do that, we just need to think differently about where we're recruiting, looking to maybe non-traditional industries, also, urban centers for some different perspectives, and having, programs or supporting educational initiatives that are specifically designed to empower women, amplify their voices, and also get them interested and curious about what opportunities exist within the agriculture industry, because they probably have some unconscious bias about, do I really want to go work in an industry that's male dominated? And is that going to give me the opportunity to develop and make the impact that I know that I can make? So I think the more we can get word out there about just how great of an industry this is to work in, how inclusive it can be towards women, and the impact that women can make in our industry is going to really serve our future.
Agreed. Tessa has some experience with that, I gather. So we can recruit her. Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tessa and Leta, for your time and your perspective today on this important topic. I hope you found this episode as thought-provoking as I did. Stay connected with us for more engaging conversations that delve into the heart of the grain industry. You can catch us on your favorite podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. Just search for Fireside Chats with Erin and hit the subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. Happy International Women's Day.